Morning, everyone.
Days after his unprecedented decision to quit as Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby has written to John Smyth's victims to apologise and offer to meet them. In the letter, the Church of England says it accepts the harm caused to you and would like to say sorry for the abuse that you have suffered and acknowledge the impact that this has had. Mr Welby has accepted in an interview with Channel 4 News last week that he was wrong to delay meeting victims for years.
I agree that was 3 years too long. You know, you can take advice and blame other people and all sort of stuff, but it doesn't matter. It's my responsibility that I didn't follow that up quickly enough or well enough.
Mr Smyth, Cathy Newman from Channel 4 News. We're told that you beat young men until they bled. Why did you do that?
I'm not talking about that.
An official review ordered after this programme's 2017 investigation into Smyth declared last week that he was the Church of England's most prolific serial abuser. But we understand that while victims have received an apology, they won't qualify for financial compensation. The Reverend Ian Paul is a General Synod member who sits on the Archbishop's Council, responsible for signing off on a £150 million fund to compensate victims of abuse.
One of the things that's strange about this is that this is not abuse that happened in the Church of England. John Smyth had connections with the Church of England, but the abuse happened primarily in connection with Winchester, with the school there, and in his own home. So this is not a question about abuse that's happened in the Church of England.
Smyth was a barrister and an evangelical Christian who in the 1970s and 1980s held leadership roles in the UN Trust, a charity that organised summer camps. Last week's official review by Keith Makin described him as associated with the Church of England. Victims who have suffered decades of trauma are appalled at what they see as a legal loophole.
I fully expected them to hide behind the fact that somebody else, another spiritual authority, was ultimately responsible for Smyth's abuses. But I can tell you, Cathy, that other victims are up in arms about this because they feel that an apology from the Archbishop of Canterbury with no consequences is no apology at all.
A solicitor or lawyer has...
Anne Olivarius is a lawyer with decades of experience in abuse cases.
Well, I have certainly, taken that group and just sectioned them off for their own reasons. It may well be because the amounts of money that would be due are significant. I think it is obviously a nonsense, but of course there may be others like John Smyth. We don't know that he's the only serial abuser. And, we know in churches like the Catholic Church, the Buddhist, there are a number, even many serial abusers. So, once they open the door to this, they will have their hands full.
While Justin Welby is quitting, many other bishops are still under pressure to do so. Victims have demanded that the Church accept full responsibility ever since we first reported on the Smyth scandal in 2017. The Archbishop of Canterbury has now done so, but the pressure is on others named in the Makin review who knew about Smyth's abuse but failed to do enough to stop it. The former Bishop of Ely, now in the Lincoln Diocese, is under growing pressure to resign over his failure to warn the authorities in South Africa, where Smyth spent the last years of his life, about the full extent of his abuse.
I've got the diary.
One victim, Graham, was the first to raise concerns about Smyth with the Ely Diocese back in 2012. Emails seen by this programme reveal that Justin Welby's Chief of Staff told Graham that the Archbishop of Canterbury had repeatedly asked Stephen Conway if he'd warned his colleagues in Cape Town about Smyth.
Over the following year or so, when Archbishop Justin saw the Bishop of Ely at several meetings of the House and College of Bishops and the Archbishop's Council, he regularly inquired about how this was being progressed.
Earlier this week, Bishop Stephen Conway told us he did all within his authority as a Bishop of the Church of England, but admits he was not rigorous in pursuing a warning about Smyth's abuse. For decades, victims have begged the Church to face up to what Smyth did. They say they won't rest until they get justice and accountability at last. And in the wake of the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation over Smyth's abuse, there are growing calls for senior leaders in the Anglican Church in Zimbabwe and South Africa also to face accountability for similar safeguarding failures. Amelia Jen is in South Africa now for us. Amelia.
Well, as the Anglican Church in the UK reels over who knew what when, there are big questions hanging over Southern Africa, where John Smyth moved after being forced out of the UK with the help of a charitable trust. He worked in Zimbabwe and then here in Cape Town. And today, the mustard heir Sir Jamie Coleman, who chaired the trust, and his wife have been asked to step back from their informal and formal roles at a church in Hampshire. This after the Macon Review found that the couple had been closely involved in a charitable trust that had financially supported John Smyth, despite knowing of those allegations. And it said that they had visited his Christian camps in Zimbabwe, that they'd stayed with him personally. And after the charity's board resigned en masse in 1989 over Smyth's refusal to stop working with youth groups, Sir Jamie took over as chair. Now, we've been unable to contact the Colemans tonight, but Sue Coleman told the Review she was unaware of the extent of allegations in the UK. And now it was 6 years after that mass resignation incident that John Smyth was charged with culpable homicide after a teenage boy was found dead in a swimming pool at one of his camps. That never came to trial. And in 2001, he moved here to Cape Town. And the Macon Review says that in 2013, the highest level of the Church of England knew about the abuse in the 70s and 80s. It said that he should have been properly and effectively reported to police and relative authorities here, but that instead he continued to pose an ongoing, and they said avoidable, safeguarding threat right up until his death in 2018. The report said that it was likely that he continued to abuse young men here.
Amelia, battling a rather windy rooftop, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's hear more now from the Reverend Dr. Ian Paul, a member of the General Synod. He began by telling me that John Smyth's abuse did not happen within the Church of England.
One of the things that's strange about this is that this is not abuse that happened in the Church of England. John Smyth had connections with the Church of England, but the abuse happened primarily in connection with Winchester, with the school there, and in his own home. So this is not a question about abuse that's happened in the Church of England. It is a question about how Justin failed to take action when he was informed of abuse that had taken place, and he had a responsibility to deal with that. But this historic abuse is not abuse in the Church of England. And one of the complications, of course, is that it is people who were ordained members of the Church of England who are participating in this very small, very elite group in the UN camps, who were aware of this and who did the cover-up in the 1980s. And the responsibility of the Church of England is to hold them to account as ministers in the Church of England. But this isn't abuse that happened in the Church of England, and just being clear about that is not avoiding anything. I think the thing that I'm encouraged about in that phrase is recognising the significance of that harm, and that is absolutely key.
Well, let's test just how much responsibility you in the Church have taken, because you're on the Archbishop's Council, so you sign off on this £150 million redress scheme. Will the Smyth victims be given access to that scheme?
And the reason it's impossible to say blanketly anyone affected by Smyth will receive funds from this is we don't know what their connections with the Church of England are. The abuse did not happen in the Church of England, but people may have connections with or reason from the Church of England why they're going to be eligible for that.
But that scheme will only apply to people who were abused on church premises by church figures. Therefore, that would seem to rule out Smyth's survivors.
Well, I don't know. I can't say, because, again, this is not about blanket criteria. It is about taking each person, each case on its merits and taking that really, really seriously.
But if you insist on saying that Smyth was not of the Church of England, that scheme applies to people who are from the Church of England.
It does, but the question is, where are the boundaries of responsibility? We want to draw the boundaries as broadly as we can, but we're not in a position to say anybody who ever was abused by anybody in the country somehow is now the responsibility of the Church of England. We're not. And again, the difficulty is here that because we haven't done the simple things that we could have done in the past, meet survivors, listen to them, then now the demands are escalating.
So isn't the reality that you don't want to open the floodgates to people who have been abused not on church premises, not by people who you, in quite a sort of legalistic definition, are not church figures? Is that right?
It's not about being legalistic. It's about being appropriate in terms of the boundaries of our responsibility. We cannot feasibly compensate anyone who's experienced abuse in any context. But what we do want to do is fulfil our responsibility in partnership with survivors, advising and consulting all the way through the process to ensure that we can provide as much support as possible.
But that then absolves the church, does it not, of responsibility to compensate victims?
It doesn't absolve us of anything for which we're responsible. As I say, the redress scheme is for those who've been abused in the Church of England and for whom we have responsibility. We've been constantly in conversation with survivors so that the scheme is as generous as it possibly can be.
We've seen Justin Welby quit this week, but there are other resignations seemingly afoot. The Reverend Sue Coleman and her husband stepped back from voluntary roles in the church this afternoon. Do you welcome that?
Quite possibly. I haven't seen those emails. I don't think they're part of Makin's report. But if that's
not. They're
the case,
emails
then
from a
I think
victim.
he has a case to answer.
Dr. Ian Paul, thanks very much. Well, we asked the Bishop of Winchester, who's the chair of the Redress Project Board, for an interview, but he wasn't available. In a statement about the Church of England's redress scheme, which isn't yet open and will have to be approved by both the General Synod and Parliament, he said it will aim to provide a compassionate and supportive process for those applying for redress from the Church. A successful application could result in a financial award, therapeutic, spiritual and emotional support, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing by the Church, and a personal apology.